Next up, we're pleased to welcome Teddy Pierce to The Truth. He's authored a new book called Dethrone Davos, Save America. It almost looks to me, Teddy, that President Trump is in the process of deconstructing Davos, and he's not even having one crossword with him. You share that instinct?
I I do think that Donald Trump is the preeminent example of these various sovereignty movements that we're seeing throughout the West that do strike a blow to the World Economic Forum and their plans for us in our future. Whether or not that dent is going to be made, and that future, I guess, has not been written yet. Thank goodness. We still have a chance to fight back, but I'm loving what I'm seeing and very hopefully optimistic about what we're seeing from Trump so far.
Well, what motivated you to write the book, and what is your insight into Davos and the New World Order?
Right. So there are a lot of folks that go down the rabbit hole, a lot of different people who are looking into so many aspects of this. And of course, it's a plan for world domination. So obviously, it's not a simple plan and it has many facets to it. Me, I'm coming from it from a ideological and philosophical background. That's my education. And what I was noticing are some major cultural shifts and some ideological lockstep that was coming out of the mainstream media and out of Hollywood and certainly out of the rest of the media that we read and watch and see. And really, that's where my into all of this began. And I was noticing these trends, these concepts that were very anti-American, particularly down to the premises, the first premises and principles that we're operating from. We're seeing that the slow cultural erosion and the slow erosion of our freedoms, not necessarily just through legislative process, although that's a part of it, but really eroding the way that we view the world as Americans. And that was eroding our ability to take the responsibility, the mantle of our freedom in a real and lasting way. So that's really where I came from it. But as the book reveals, I got a lot more than I bargained for, and I realized that there's not a single aspect of this that's not connected, whether it's economic, political, or cultural.
So I don't profess to know much about the New World Order. I know what I've read and what I've gleaned from talking to really smart people like yourself. But you've also got China there that says that they want to and intend to dominate the world by 2050. Now, would they be working in concert or at odds with the Davos folks?
Yeah. Well, in many ways they are, and in other ways they aren't. Fundamentally, they are not on the same team. They are viewing China's plans and the way that they view world domination is different than the Davos crowd. But they're certainly going to allow each other to benefit each other towards their separate ends, if that makes sense.
Well,
And
sure,
so
but
I think what we're seeing is a lot of collaboration with China, with the West. But as we see, we're renegotiating our trade deal with them. Hopefully that will rebalance our trade agreements. But you can see that China really is involved in the West and in the Davos crowd's own economic holdings, insofar as it's beneficial to China. And of course, it's beneficial to both. But they're certainly not in tandem, and each of their plans for world domination don't allow for the other to survive or the other to be a contender in their plans.
and
But I
you,
might add, the
yes.
World Economic Forum says 2030 is their plan to have world domination. So they're a little bit ahead of the curve.
Well, I think they're on their heels right now because Donald Trump is disrupting their plans. But back to China, even Larry Fink, chairman of BlackRock, has said that our system of government is not very efficient, and that China has a very much more efficient form of government. Now, I don't know that that constitutes encouraging us to disband our republic, but where's that coming from? I mean, look, democracy is messy, okay, but it just seems like on any kind of a human value, it's the right place to govern from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is coming from the underlying ideology and philosophy that drives Davos from the very top all the way down to the investment bankers like Larry Fink and these ultra wealthy movers in entrepreneurship and business, even down to the political movements that we're seeing. And it's this denial of truth. And the philosophical term is called relativism.
Mm.
But it's to say there is no truth. Reality is what I can make it. And there are no morals by which the world should operate other than by the strong man, what the strong man says, and he deserves and has a right to rule. And of course, that fits very conveniently into plans for these globalists who believe that they ought to rule the world because of their power and their influence.
Well,
You
you
can
know,
see that the same ideology in China and totalitarian movements throughout the world. But that abolishment of truth is necessary for someone to feel a sovereign godship themselves and right to rule.
well, it's sort of like who do these people think they are to want to be able to somehow dominate the world? And they've got a little problem with that. One is Donald Trump, but the other one is Vladimir Putin. And I read an article 6 months ago that he basically said, "Hell no, it's just not going to happen. Forget about it," and that Russia's not going to go along with any of that. Politics makes pretty strange bedfellows, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. And that's why you see this coalition of the BRICS nations and this sort of counterbalance to what we're being sold as a counterbalance to the West. But more than that, it's really a group of countries, Russia and China being preeminent in them, standing up against this global movement. And this global movement that has captured the West, it's driven our governments to the level of bureaucracy and control, and then to this ideological madness. And so we're seeing a standing up. And I think that, as you say, strange bedfellows, we're certainly not wanting to become apologists to anybody that we disagree with on the world stage. But certainly these sovereignty movements that are rising up represent this divide. I think we're seeing this divide in the world today, which is it's we the people versus this established global order that certainly is inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. But that's what we're seeing is we the people versus this global establishment. And certainly I will praise Putin where I can praise him, and that doesn't make me an apologist of his, but really recognizing that this is a madness and it is deconstructionist. It's meant to destroy your country and put you in a place of desperation. Your hands out and begging for their solutions is exactly what they're doing.
Well, when I see things like COVID, which we don't really, I don't think we've got a full accounting on yet. There's a lot of suspicions, but not many answers. I mean, just the fact that our own U.S. government, under the direction of Anthony Fauci, were funding the Wuhan laboratory, and take Fauci for example, the fact that he can't seem to tell the truth and he's lied to us to our faces since the outbreak of COVID makes you very suspicious. So then you say, well, if these things aren't true, if social distancing doesn't help stop the spread, if masks don't help, if the virus came from a bat cave 2 hours away from Wuhan, and all the other lies that he tried to sell us, what is he covering up? What truth does he not want us to know? And was that a subversive, uh, deliberate act? Is what I continue to wonder. Trump walks all the way up to that line without saying it. He calls it the China virus, but he does. I've never heard him say that he thought that it was unleashed on us intentionally. But as implausible as that sounds, what does make it worthy of consideration, worth looking into, is that we know that the Chinese, particularly the leadership, do not have the same value on human life that we do. And so killing a few million people is nothing to them, evidently, if it helps move them closer to their ultimate goal of dominating the world. It, you can make a pretty convincing argument to me that getting Trump out of the way was necessary and a step in that direction. And they did have the effect of costing Donald Trump his second term in office in 2020. What are you thinking?
I do believe that there is a lot more orchestration in the background than we probably will ever know. Speaking of the this melding of the minds here, China is where those labs, those virology labs are that are being funded by America. They're being funded by the taxpayer, not because we want that, but because the global order steals the tax dollars of the West and spends them however they want. We're funding our own enslavement. And we see that China is totally willing to play cabal in those regards because they want to be a part of destabilizing the West as well. Ultimately, they see a destabilization as something good for their ultimate aims.
Well,
But I
and
think what you're dealing with is people who are operating at a level that you and I and everyday Joe, we're trying to do what's best for our community and our family. When you're talking about somebody who's willing to manipulate the world in such a way as to release a well, one, let's take it. They're creating a virus that is more deadly and more dangerous. That's the whole purpose of the virology lab in Wuhan to begin with. And so whoever thought that was a good idea, and to ostensibly or arguably to use that for biological warfare, that's the type of person that we're talking about that there's no amount of there's no moral quandary standing in their way to think that they have the right to rule. And that is exactly the type of person who would just release a virus on the world in order to cause chaos, in order to get the outcome that they wanted. And, I'm not here to tell you I have the receipts, I'm not an investigative journalist, but I can see things. I have common sense.
right.
And if you told me plausibly that that was actually what happened and that came all the way from the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates and his vaccine initiative all the way down for that express purpose, and I had to bet on that or it was just a bunch of coincidences, I know where I'd put my chips.
Well, I'm with you. And then you look at the amount of fentanyl that has come across our southern border. I think fentanyl has killed something approaching 500,000 young Americans. I know when I ran for office in Georgia and met over 10,000 people in the campaign, at every campaign stop, almost without exception, someone would come up to me and tell me a story about losing a child or a loved one to a fentanyl encounter. And then, cops have to take that Narcan everywhere they go because if they touch fentanyl, it can kill them. Then you look at the BLM movement, the riots that occurred in 2019 after George Floyd. It felt then, as it does now, to have been contrived. I mean, George Floyd, I'm sorry the cop put him in a sleeper hold. I'm also sorry that he was on a cocktail of illegal recreational drugs that were probably more contributing to his death than the sleeper hold. And I'm sorry that George Floyd died. I'm also sorry for the toll it took on that police officer and for the riots that it then seemingly started organically in our country. But I'm not a believer that it was organic. I think that there were deliberate provocateurs and that there was an organized effort to put this country in chaos, which, by the way, also helped detract from President Trump's first term. So it did then and it does now feel like that there are subversive forces at work in our country, and it just feels to me that we need to wake up and deal with it.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And I will say too, ruling the world isn't easy.
Yeah.
They have huge power economically, politically, and culturally, and they're manipulating those things and in the strings of power that they hold in each of those arenas to exact what they want. And one of the huge things that they use politically, and we see this, it's very indicative in the West and our European neighbors and our neighbor to the north, Canada, certainly has this much worse than we do. But the use of communism or collectivism more generally and Marxist rhetoric is a tool for that they use for political deconstruction. And it's mainly in the Progressive Party that we see today. And we're getting to this point where, we're talking about the Green New Deal as though that's a totally legitimate piece of legislation. Don't get me started on the modern gender theories that we're talking about,
Yeah,
and all of these
another
things.
divisive tactic.
Yes, most certainly. And you
Except I
know,
say it's divisive. The only problem is I can't find anybody that I know that think that men should play in women's sports. So, I mean, I don't know who it is dividing, but it certainly does stir up a lot of ruckus.
right. Well, it certainly is an 80-20 issue, and there are many 80-20 issues right now that the Democrats are getting behind. And I don't, the purpose of it is all of these politicians are World Economic Forum young global leaders. And these are the people who show up to Davos to receive their awards and go through their training program, but it's just an ascent to this liberal modernity that globalism has created and has ruled our foreign policy at least since the end of World War II. This and selling this idea of liberal modernity as the inevitable march of the future. So really what we're seeing now is that playing out to the end. And liberalism is supposed to, in the globalist mind, give over all of the institutional power that it's absorbed throughout America and Western governments and give that as an inheritance to these progressives. And from there, it will be a rapid decline. And destabilization is the name of the game. The more desperate we are and the more our hands are outstretched for a strong man to give us a solution to all of our ills, the more likely we are to assent to exactly what they want, which is a soft coup, and for no country to change its name and no political leader to change its name. They've placed them all. They're all ideological friendlies. And the only thing that really changes is we reset. We get to a point where it's a mandatory United Nations with them as the rule by expert class telling us how we ought to live.
Oh, excuse me. Speaking of mandatory, I think it's this week that the deadline occurs for obtaining a real ID if you want to travel
Mm-hmm.
on a commercial airliner. There's something about that that just doesn't feel right to me. What are you thinking?
I do believe that the real ID, of course, that's a vestige from Patriot Act days, and it's
Hmm.
just been delayed and delayed and delayed. So now it's coming to the fore. One of the things that you have to really understand if you really want to understand the globalists, you really understand that you're dealing with an abusive system. You're dealing with a system of abuse, and you are the victim. And so, in the BLM riots, good example, they're going to destabilize communities. They're going to burn things down. They're going to cause all kinds of havoc and chaos. And then they're going to use that as a political talking point for safety and stability, for Democrat rule in the future. It doesn't matter. And they're going to contradict themselves constantly because, the abuser beats you one minute and buys you flowers the next, right? The point is not the point. Winning is the point. Maintaining the system of abuse is the point. With Real ID, they never let any good crisis go to waste. And so Real ID is and can be a very good first step towards what they ultimately want, which is a central bank digital currency. And so they're going to use even illegal immigration as a tool. If the West really fought back against illegal immigration, they'd push Real ID as well and say, well, if you're a citizen of the country, you get a Real ID, the other people can't, and then that way we'll know who's who. But ultimately, it's a digital documentation of who we are and tracks everywhere we go, and uh, it's just one more mechanism for control. And again, the point's not the point. Winning is the point. And if we're all digitally identified, who gets the win?
Yeah, and the same people just don't want you to have to use your real ID to vote. It seems a
Right.
little at odds to me.
The only exclusion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how did you get started on this path? You're a pretty young guy. Where'd you go to college?
I went to Holy Apostles. It's up in Cromwell, Connecticut. That's where I got my philosophy degree.
And so what got you focused on uh, the New World Order and the World Economic Forum? And I get you know Klaus Schwab is
Of
retiring.
course.
Who is his successor, and what is he going to be, better or worse? I'm fearful worse. But what got you interested? What was your path to write this book? And then what do you think of the new leader?
Yeah, well, I would say I owe a lot of that to circumstances growing up. I grew up in an abusive household, and that was something that was really hard for me to understand. But growing up, you're in a parent-child relationship. There's no way out. So the only thing that you can do as a survival mechanism is see the system for what it is and see how you can avoid, direct abuse all the time. And so that was a lot of formation, mental formation for me. And I think that that's why I came to have a love for philosophy, because it's the system of human thought. And when you deal with, unfortunately, when you deal with injustices to that degree, it's not unfortunate that you have a love for the truth. It's just unfortunate that that's how you came by it.
Yeah.
But I'm somebody who can read and see systems very quickly, and I identify people who are manipulating systems for the sake of their own power. And I think that as I started unraveling the cultural things that I was seeing, that really opened my eyes to a lot, and seeing that there was so much power that the media had to tell stories and tell them the way they wanted to tell them. From there, you're scaling up, you follow the dollars, you follow the money. It leads you to realizing that it's not just a bunch of independent systems operating together. So that was, like I said, I got more than I bargained for when I began, but that really, I owe that to my background and my particular ability to see systems that most other people don't have to worry about in their everyday life.
All right. So if you follow the money and you follow it all the way back, who does it lead to? Who are the puppet masters?
These puppet masters are people who have had generational wealth for centuries at this point. They're the owners of the central banks all throughout Europe. I name names in the book, and I always hate to sound so cloak and dagger, but if you say these people's names, on a video broadcast, you're going to get throttled pretty quickly.
Mm.
And you can say the names of the Rockefellers and the Morgan Stanleys and people like that who were really the new money at the time of the founding of the Federal Reserve. But the names that were generational wealth before that, you can't say. And all of these people, they're the people that are really driving through their immense holdings. A central bank is just a giant pile of cash that loans out money to other people, to Wall Street banks and to banks throughout the world for, the billionaire class to do their business.
Well, what
And
about
so that's
Soros and Gates? Would you put them in that category as
yeah.
well?
Well, and those are the new money. That's
Yeah.
why Bill Gates is the forward facer. Klaus Schwab, Soros, they're all forward facing. They have to do the public work, while these people get to hide behind their names and all of the systems of power that they've built to protect themselves.
Well, that's a fascinating analysis. Teddy Pierce, author of Dethrone Davos, Save America. Thank you so much for coming on. I've thoroughly
Hey,
enjoyed
thank you so much
our
for having
time.
me.
Where can people keep up with you, and where can they find the book?
The book is on Amazon in ebook and Audible as well as paperback. And I am on X at Teddy P 1776. And I have a Substack of the same title at Teddy P 1776.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Teddy. I look forward to following you and hope to have you back on soon.
Great. Looking forward to it.